the show. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, obviously. I mean, shit, like what the hell are we doing here? You know what I mean? Welcome back to my winter wonderland. Enjoying this awesome patio. And Merry Christmas to all of you. Merry Christmas, indeed. You know, things have changed a lot for me recently, especially with the universal compatibility theory. It's given me an entirely new fundamental understanding of the 16 types, but especially an understanding of the differences between men and women and how each of the 16 types act between each other. You could take two ISTPs. You have an ISTP male and you have an ISTP female. And now for the first time, we're finally able to identify exactly how and why they are different. This is so fundamental that it entirely goes outside of any other psychoanalysis system in the world. Not even Socionics does a really good job of going over the differences between male and female traits in terms of cognition. Not in a meaningful way like this. That being said, I still have great respect for the Socionic Society because without Socionics, we would not be here today discussing Jungian analytical psychology at this level. Even Lasergun informed me today that Personality Database, for example, considers C.S. Joseph the raid boss of typology. Goddamn right. I am the raid boss of typology. That being said, there is another raid boss out there, a raid boss of Socionics, and that is Mr. Lamb Sauce, who is a fellow ENTP. So shout out to Lamb Sauce. I really enjoy watching him and his ENTP antics. I really enjoy him, actually. He's up there for me with Dave Powers as, in my opinion, probably the most respectable content creators within the MBTI blogosphere or YouTubeosphere, to be fair. These gentlemen, I know I typed Dave Powers INTJ in the past, but I actually personally believe he's an ENTP now due to advances in my own understanding of the science and the understandings that we've gone from there. Hello, CL, I guess. Kla. Call you Kla. Hi, Kla. CLUH, the Kla. Welcome. Oh. That's not going to work. Fair enough. That needs to be fixed. Hello, Jehu Lala, I think. Oof. Got some ash in the wrong place. We'll just make do. So, one of the biggest issues about ENTPs is that we end up having a lot of difficulties with one particular issue in our lives. And it's very common among ENTPs. And that is our spiritual journey. Our spiritual journey ends up becoming a really serious problem for us. You know, it may look like it's actually even easier for ISFJs, but more accurately, ISFJs just end up quickly adopting the belief system and adopting the spirituality of their family or their culture like right away, and they put all of their faith into it because their virtue and vice is faith versus fear, right? And it ends up, you know, being easy for them earlier in life, but as they get older and older and later in life, their spirituality becomes actually a source of huge conflict for them, especially among ISFJ men, because the ENTP archetype of their subconscious heavily relies on the masculine function of TI parent, and TI parent is concerned with the truth. And oftentimes, ISFJ men end up carrying around a great debt of guilt that they've had throughout their lives, as a result of being spiritual zealots or being loyal to certain belief systems over time that have continued to be a problem for them. I don't envy them. I really don't envy them at all. Versus the ENTP, who has the actual opposite problem, majorly opposite problem, and in doing so, because they have this this issue, it ends up like just like what the Bible says. The first will be last, and last will be first. The ISFJ leads. At first with their spirituality, and that can be a big problem. Whereas the ENTP does not, and that's been a huge problem for myself, especially since, let's be honest, I'm not exactly welcome. I'm not welcome in churches, for example, any more than I am welcome in the mosque, either, to be fair. I have this problem, ever since I was like an ENTP child, of just asking questions, asking questions of a spiritual nature, always asking questions. And, because TI parent can't help itself but like notice contradictions and, potential issues of question. Like, as a child, I couldn't go up to my pastor and be like, hey, why is it in the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about, escaping King Herod, or maybe that was Gospel of Luke. Yet in the other Gospel of Matthew, I believe, it talks about, Joseph didn't go to Egypt. Instead, he goes to Nazareth, right? And, little tiny questions like that can't really be answered, right? Or questions to an imam at a mosque where you're like, hey, so someone explained to me why, if the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, also known as the one true God, is, if he's speaking to his prophets saying, thus saith the Lord, and they didn't need an intermediary like the angel Gabriel to deliver revelation for them, and God is so powerful and that he could deliver revelation directly without an intermediary, directly to individuals, like with Musa, aka Moses, getting the 10 Commandments written by the hand of God at the top of a mountain, for example. But we have to have the angel Gabriel to, talk about the Prophet Muhammad. Then what exactly, like, that's a little weird to me. I mean, didn't an angel also supposedly visit Joseph Smith, who founded the Mormon Church? You know what I'm saying? And then using stone glasses to, decipher some golden plates. It sounds like something derived from Freemasonry. Yet Joseph Smith was a Freemason. You know what I'm saying? So, like, it's just a lot of questions. And oftentimes people assume, as an ENTP, that the questions that you're asking, these spiritual questions that you're asking, are condemnation, instead of, like, actually just a little kid trying to get answers to questions, because the little kid, out of everyone, is actually noticing the inconsistencies. Not unlike Yoda in Star Wars Episode 2 saying, truly fascinating is the mind of a child. I'm misquoting him when I'm saying that, by the way. A mind of a child is, he's all laughing and whatnot. But the point is that these adults in my life couldn't indulge these questions. And then you find out when you're reading, like, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, as well as some biographies of church whatsoever, because he was not actually able to really complete his spiritual journey for similar reasons, because he had questions that no one had answers to. So what it ends up becoming is this, like, huge barrier, the barrier of TI parent. Whereas a TI child coupled with the TE trickster of an ISFJ, or even an INFJ, expert thinking trickster, makes it easy for these two types to be gaslit into adopting basically any belief system of someone around them. The INFJ will mirror people and mirror their belief system, while the ISFJ will mimic the belief system and then take on the habits of that belief system, and then both of them will be enforcers of said belief system, which then could end up causing them to have insane guilt later in life if they no longer adopt that belief system, which is a huge problem. Whereas the ENTP has the complete opposite problem. Whereas at first they start with questions from a TI parent point of view, and it's like, okay, why should I adopt this belief system? Things need to make sense to me. What's wrong? But then we're oftentimes derided and removed from the situation because of our, because of the questions we ask, because oftentimes people become super offended based on the questions that we ourselves are asking. And this really inhibits people in their spiritual journey. At least ENTP women have it easier. At least ISFJ women have it easier. At least INFJ women have it easier. Women in general have it easier with spirituality. And the reason why is because as their men lead them throughout their life, their men will lead them to their spirituality, and a woman will ultimately adopt the spirituality of her man. That's just the reality. That's scientific. That's psychology. That's just what women do. Because the thing is that even from a biblical perspective, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your woman believes. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're in a sexual relationship with her and she belongs to you, according to the Apostle Paul, she is, quote, sanctified or set apart. Set apart, meaning that, she gets to, enjoy, your heavenly reward with you, basically, is kind of the argument that the church makes, that in terms of those that follow a Pauline doctrine. Okay, someone in the chat, let me know when it's back. Oh, looks like it's back. It's starting to record again. I had to switch networks there because this network does not like live streaming for some reason. It just doesn't. I seem to only be able to live stream on just my phone's local internet. So, but yeah, like women have it easy. Well, okay, women have it easy in terms of their own spirituality because a woman's spirituality is entirely based on her relationship with her man, basically. And, she's ultimately judged, at the end of days based on how well she conducted herself with her relationship with her man being her father, her man being her husband, her man being her son or sons thereof, like the men closest to her in her life, basically. And her spirituality is defined, and the result of her spirituality is defined literally from that point of view. So women technically have it easy from that perspective, which means the male burden of performance in terms of their spirituality is ultimately to seek God. But then when you have the ISFJ who has the virtue of faith and the vice of fear, which the ENTP shares in because that's the ENTP subconscious. The ENTP starts out with the questions in life and not willing to adopt the belief system, and spend so much time of the rest of their life trying to find the specific belief system for them to adopt, to the point where they already feel like outcasts, regardless of any belief system that they are involved with, by default, literally by default. Because it's so much easier for an FJ man to adopt a belief system. It's so much easier, but it's so much harder for a TP man to do it. It's so much harder. If you think about it, the least religious of the types are actually thinking, perceiving men. Entirely. ISFJ or ISTPs, you don't often see ISTP men in church. It's like very rare. ESTPs, you really don't often see them in church. It's very, very rare. ENTPs, you'll see them in church because that's what they grew up with, typically. And INTPs, they're usually not in church because they're usually too busy being gluttonous on other things and exploring other things and not spending any time on their spirituality. Because spirituality to an INTP is usually an extremely low priority to them, even though it's a vast frontier that could be explored. But oftentimes, I don't really see INTP men in church. Although, to be fair, there is an INTP pastor that lives just down the street. And he is the pastor of the local chapel. So it's not to say it doesn't happen. It's just rare. It's just rare. It's not to say that TPs are not in church. I'm just saying that it's rare. And then FPs typically just follow along with the FJs. They typically follow along. They follow along the TJs, right? You'll see the TJs and the FJs in church getting involved in, religion very, very often. Even INTJ men, believe it or not, actually, INTJ men, they're either on the extreme of like completely anti-spiritual and entirely nihilistic to the point where they are the biggest men of faith I've ever seen in my life, with their ISFJ superego being brought through and mapped through their introverted sensing demon. And it's just so interesting to me. Is spirituality different from religion? I mean, technically, religion is just an expression of spirituality, a hadith. That's all. So, what ends up being a problem is that ENTPs are oftentimes at a crossroads, because from the God function of extroverted feeling, we find ourselves knowingly, we already know just how unacceptable we are in churches. We already know how unacceptable we are at the mosque. We already know how unacceptable we are in the temple. We already know how unacceptable we are basically everywhere. Spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, it's the same shit. It's always the same. And it always ends up being a problem, like a big problem over time. So for us, the ENTP, first will be last will be first. We're typically not going to discover, as ENTP men, we're not really going to get involved with our spirituality until later in life in general anyway. And even if we do, usually the only reason we're able to is because we're wearing a mask. We're consistently wearing a mask. However, because of Jungian analytical psychology, because of what I've come to know as a result of Jungian analytical psychology, and know about physics and metaphysics as a result, we end up being in this situation where we start to actually understand the nature of the universe and how it's structured and how it actually works. Like, for example, how the universe is a base 4 system. Not a base 2 system, it is a base 4 system. The universe can be broken down into 4 binary characters. 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1. Those 4 binary characters. And everything is structured in 4s. Everything. Everything's structured in 4s. Electricity, Nikola Tesla often talked about this. He's an INTP. He would often talk about how electricity is structured from a perspective of 3s, in a sequence of 3s. But the 4th piece of the 3s was always the ground. The ground, the earth itself, was always the 4th piece to the other 3s. So while Tesla would take advantage of the 3s in order for him to reach his mastery of electricity and electrical systems, within that 369 sequence of his, the 4th piece was always present, and that was always the earth itself. It was always the ground, basically, right? And so therefore, it's still, the universe itself is entirely structured in 4s, just like we have 4 cognitive functions in our egos. We have 4 sides of the mind, right? It's always structured in that 4 ways, 4 being a number of completeness to a point. And I'm sure you numerologists out there will be freaking out at this point, but it's a fact. 4 has extreme universal value as a number. And a lot of people typically don't understand that. Because of this, I presented information where I literally prove the existence of God. I literally prove the existence of intelligence design. I prove intelligent design. I prove it in season 17. I believe it's the first 4 or first 5 episodes of season 17 playlist here on the YouTube channel and on the podcast. And using Jungian analytical psychology, the first episode is titled The Source of All Cognition. It really just goes to show that humanity is literally imago Dei, which means in the image of God, basically. Humanity literally actually is. And from this, we are able to come up with some derivative thinking to come up with additional conclusions. Conclusions like how humanity is primarily made of earth and water, yet our souls are made of fire and wind. Fire and wind. It's the electrical system, which is fire and wind, that crosses across our central nervous system, basically. Fire and wind, okay? In our earth and water bodily system. They say we're mostly made of water. Then the Bible says we were created out of dust, for example, which is earth, essentially. So our body's made like this. And then like, oh, if we're actually made of this and we're actually a solipsistic race, where we put self above tribe naturally, because humanity is mortal as a race, right? That basically means from us in our own mortality, we have no choice but to think of ourselves first because we know we die. So as a result of that, we know we're solipsistic. But does that mean that angels, for example, their bodies are primarily composed of fire and wind, and that their souls are actually made of earth and water, little tiny earth and water particles contained within their fire and wind bodies? Does that also mean that, logically speaking, it's not too big of a leap of logic, that they are tribe above self and they're a very idealistic race? You see what I'm saying, folks? When you understand the universe as a base force system, it's very, from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective, it's very easy to draw these conclusions about metaphysics entirely. You don't need someone on a freaking mountain claiming to have met the ascended masters, etc., from the theosophical perspective, to be able to come up with these conclusions. It's pretty easy. This is kind of like where, for the first time in a long time, we're able to actually take spirituality and actually match it directly to science based on these theories, right? Theories of metaphysics. And there's theories of metaphysics that allowed Tesla to create the technologies that he did. It was theories of metaphysics that Einstein was able to come to conclusions about the theory of relativity, which was actually proved in 2020, long after his death. It was proven. They did prove it with imaging of a black hole bending light, basically. And the photos of that proving the theory of relativity are just absolutely fantastic. Which type is most likely to experience blind faith? Young ISFJs, but not old ones. Older ISFJs typically lose their faith, right? Whereas, ENTPs later in life are more likely to gain their faith. Essentially, that's the primary argument I'm trying to make here, folks. So there's a huge burden upon the ENTP, who is already a religious outcast by default, just by virtue of being an ENTP. We wear masks to play it safe, to adopt the religious nature of our societies that we live in. If we're born in the Middle East, we will act and behave like a Muslim and wear a mask. And our religion is basically a mask in general. Like deep down, we know that there's something wrong. There's something wrong there. It's no different in Western society when you're participating in churches. It's no difference. Deep down, something is wrong as an ENTP. All you have to do is bother to look, and you'll see a lot of the contradictions. You'll see a lot of the issues. It's one of the reasons why I've researched Bart Ehrman as much as I have. He is an INTP. He is a biblical scholar. He is an agnostic. And I don't agree with his agnosticism because the conclusions that I was able to derive as a result of knowing Jungian analytical psychology, as a result of those conclusions, I was able to actually basically prove intelligent design. Intelligent design is truth. It is a fact. Intelligent design is a thing. So we had to have been created by an intelligence because otherwise to believe in evolution is to believe in chaos theory. But order never comes from chaos. Order begets order. Chaos does not beget order. So just on logic alone, we know that intelligent design is actually an absolute truth. Most people argue that absolute truth doesn't even exist. It does exist. And there's a formula that proves the existence of absolute truth. Because here it is. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Nice ash. Nice ass, too. Anyway, so the point is like, here's how you prove absolute truth. If someone was to come up to you and say, absolute truth does not exist, I would say to them, well, is that a true statement? And then they would say, well, no. And I'm like, okay, well, then I guess absolute truth does exist. But if they said, yes, absolute truth doesn't exist, that's a true statement. I'm like, well, but then it cancels itself out. It cancels itself out. And the only thing left over after canceling itself out is that absolute truth has to exist. So we know absolute truth exists. And we know that through Jungian analytical psychology, based on the arguments that I provide in the season 17 playlist, where I talk about quadras, basically, and then also eventually the temples themselves and the God functions themselves, we know that humanity has to be based on an intelligence. So intelligent design is true, which means we prove the existence of God through Jungian analytical psychology. We proved it. There you go. There's the evidence. Go check it out. It's self-evident. You can't deny it. So people out there who deny the existence of God, I just have to like laugh at them, because it's just like, well, if you knew Jungian analytical psychology and its fundamentals, it's undeniable. Get over it. You know, it's not. So the question then becomes, you know, okay, yeah, intelligent design, okay, who made us, etc. Okay, you know, God exists. So then it really becomes, the question really is actually this: which God made us? That's really the question. That's the actual question. And that's the question that ENTPs later in life end up suffering with consistently. But then an ENTP man gets to a point in his life where he starts having relationships, especially sexual relationships with women, basically. And then, based on that life experience of having sexual relationships with women, additional understanding about how God works ends up actually coming to fruition, coming to light. No, that does not mean that, chick. That does not mean that. No, because if you actually research, I recommend you read a book called The Book of Enoch, where it talks about the Watchers of heaven, which were these angelic beings that were charged with taking care of the earth, basically. And the Watchers ended up raping women, and those women gave birth to giants. And basically, in prehistory, the earth, it was basically Attack on Titan, essentially. It was Attack on Titan, was like how the earth was in prehistory. This is corroborated by Jimmy Corsetti, who is an ENTP, and his work on the Bright Insight YouTube channel. Just watch the Atlantis playlist. That's a really good starting point. Combine that with Bill Cooper's work and his Hour of the Time radio show, which basically is a podcast now, essentially. But before Bill Cooper was killed, he's an INTP, and INTPs are really awesome researchers with their discovery origin. He learned about the world's oldest recorded religion, which is the Mystery Babylon religion. The Mystery Babylon religion was an ancient religion, which eventually became the Egyptian pantheon, the Hindu pantheon, the Greek pantheon, and the Viking pantheon. And all those pantheons and their stories, if you look at it, are entirely identical. Is it any wonder that the Viking pantheon talks about the frost giants or the giants on the mountains, much unlike the prehistory, to the point where a lot of the stories of these ancient mythologies, you could actually argue, especially after becoming familiar with Jimmy Corsetti's work and Bill Cooper's work, you could actually argue that that's actually real-world history, based on all these guys' different works and their different researches. You can actually see the link between them all. And that's pretty terrifying. So if the giants existed, then that means that the Watchers existed. And if the Watchers existed, things become pretty freaking clear. The Watchers, who were basically angels, and they rebelled against the Creator's decree in taking over the earth, essentially. You learn this in the Book of Enoch, which, to my knowledge, was written around the same time as the Book of Genesis and has just as much historical backing as the Book of Genesis, yet it was actually removed from biblical canon by the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Trent, and the Council of Carthage, ultimately, where a bunch of old men got into a room and voted on what they believed was the biblical canon. And then I have random Christian people at the local bar telling me about how they're putting their faith into those councils and how they are divinely inspired, to which I'm like, okay, yeah, so I should just put my faith in men then? Really? How can I even do that? So the ENTP ends up going on a search a search for God, a search for spirituality later in life. It's inevitable. It just happens. It just happens. And sometimes they deny it, and sometimes they don't go on that journey, even though it's actually slowly eating at them over time, especially in the men. Really, especially in the men. It just starts eating at them over time. It ends up getting worse and worse and worse to a point where they may find themselves on their deathbed, freaked out, entirely terrified about what's going on, because they still haven't been able to complete their search, as it were. That's very scary. It's very scary for those ENTPs who are ultimately in that situation. So when it just goes further about how much we don't actually know about history. I mean, even the Dark Ages, there's arguments out there that the Dark Ages never actually happened, that Charlemagne was actually entirely fake and not actually true. And like there's this whole conspiracy theory around it. The thing is that when you look into Bill Cooper's work, it's rife with conspiracy theory. When we look at Jimmy Corsetti's work, it's rife with conspiracy theory. So interesting how NTPs are often the ones closest to conspiracy theory, ultimately. But while they are theories, the thing is that you can look at the output, conspiracy theory being the input. We could process it with our own thinking and realize that the outputs kind of match. There is an argument to be made that conspiracy theories are true. You can often go to blacklistednews.com, search conspiracy theory, and look at the headlines of all the articles with the word conspiracy theory in them, and you'll see XYZ conspiracy theory was proven true. And then you can actually read an article that shows the evidence about said conspiracy theory, right? And like it's more common than people realize. They just don't know where to look. Oftentimes because Google is censoring what we see. Google search shows you what Google wants you to see, not what is actually out there. And for people to make the assumption otherwise is entirely ridiculous. So this ends up becoming like a big problem. There was a nation on the earth called Tartary, and with the Tartar people, and it was completely written out of history, even though we know it existed, but it was completely written out of history. This is where arguments that the Dark Ages never actually happened. So that too is a big problem. There's a lot of problems when it comes to history. So in my own life, with my own spiritual journey, it's interesting because I'm a biblical scholar. I'm very aware of the Judeo-Christian point of view. I'm also very aware of the Muslim point of view, and because I don't agree with polytheism at all. For myself, in my own ENTP spiritual journey and seeking God, I reject polytheism entirely. The reason why is because every polytheistic pantheon on the planet, as shown through Jimmy Corsetti's work, Bart Ehrman's work, Bill Cooper's work, and the work of so many others out there, you start to realize that all of those pantheons point to the same group of entities, which are the Watchers, okay? To the point where the leader of the Watchers, known as Samael, for example, Samael is basically Zeus, right? So, and from that point of view, like, the Watchers themselves basically became and acted like gods, essentially, to humanity, with, like, for example, Azazel, aka like Prometheus or something, giving fire and technology and magic to humanity, etc., or what humanity understood as magic. In those days, it probably was science, But the point is that I believe personally that the Watchers and the stories of the Watchers from prehistory are actually all these pantheons. Are all these pantheons. I mean, even Jimmy Corsetti started talking about how south of the Atlas Mountains in Mauritania, in Africa, and at the eye of the Sahara, also known as the Rakat structure, was the lost city of Atlantis and those ruins, right? And it was King Atlas, the first king of Atlantis, basically. Atlas is seen as a god, basically, in the Greek pantheon who holds the world on his shoulders. Yet Atlantis was the center of the world, and it was the center of commerce. It was the most advanced civilization on the planet in that time, in prehistory. And then arguments are made that King Atlas of Atlantis actually was a Nephilim because Atlas's father was Poseidon. Poseidon is one of the Watchers, one of the watchers of heaven, according to the book of Enoch. Okay, when you're looking at this historical perspective, which gets pretty crazy if you actually think about it. So there's more evidence to suggest that every polytheistic pantheon on the planet is actually based on the watchers entirely. Entirely. All the stories match the same. Now, Carl Jung talked about how this is the collective unconscious and how all these stories are the same, and Joseph Campbell's work, which is the hero's journey, which is part of the collective unconscious of man, as it were, from that perspective. But the reason why is that the collective unconscious, which is expert intuition, is still based on, which is a feminine function, it's still based on introverted sensing history. Because how the collective unconscious or expert intuition works, psychologically speaking, is that all that has happened before will happen again, essentially, okay? Which means that in order for it to be in the collective unconscious in man to begin with, because that's a feminine function, a masculine function of introverted sensing is ultimately the source, which would mean that it had to have happened. It had to actually have been a piece of our history in order for it to actually be, or in order for it to actually manifest in the collective unconscious of mankind. This is an area where Carl Jung was not able to actually finish his work, right? And now, basically, I am the person now who is finishing that work for him. Carl Jung, as the raid boss of typology, as the raid boss of Jungian analytical psychology, according to Personality Database, right? And I am the raid boss, and the raid boss has determined that that yes, Carl Jung's work is ultimately incomplete, and it's incomplete because there's still a source of the collective unconscious, which is ultimately the history of humanity, the introverted sensing of humanity, the history of humanity that has happened to humanity is fueling the collective unconscious, is fueling the hero's journey, is fueling all of our mythos and mythology across all these polytheistic pantheons and these stories, basically. So if that's the case, as a result of coming to that conclusion, I have no choice but to realize that any polytheistic belief system out there is by default bullshit. It's entirely bullshit. It is bullshit, which means monotheistic belief systems end up having more credibility. They end up having more credibility. And the monotheistic belief systems out there who have more credibility, well, the only monotheistic belief systems out there are based on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's it. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, it's all based on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the end of the day, also known as Yahweh, okay? So that would basically, so by process elimination, that would basically mean that Yahweh would essentially be the creator, and that anything that is polytheistic is essentially a lie. It's a lie. So, well, I don't have to prove it's already happened because all the other people out there, like Jimmy Corsetti and Bart Ehrman and Bill Cooper and all these other sources that I've stated, have already done that work. Go watch their crap. Go read their books. Seriously, just go understand it. Like, seriously. I mean, you could even read, Freemasonry books, or Theosophy books, like Elena Blavatsky or Manly P. Hall or Albert Pike out there too, which is the occult. And even the occult admits that there is a one true God, except that they're loyal to Lucifer because Lucifer rebelled against the one true God, essentially. And there's an argument to be made that the Watchers of Heaven were subservient to Lucifer, basically, and his rebellion in the celestial realms, basically. And from that point of view, some people argue that Zeus, aka Samael, the chief watcher, is Lucifer. I'm not entirely sure about that. I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't know. I really don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question. It's debatable. But the point is that based on this input and then coming to logical conclusions, polytheistic belief systems are fake. They're bullshit. Ignore them. Just ignore them. So what's left is having a spiritual belief system that's centered around Yahweh, or a spiritual belief system that's centered around Lucifer. That's basically your choice. Those are the only choices that are left over, essentially. There is a really good friend of mine. He's an ESTP, actually. He reminds me of Anton LaVey, who is the creator of the Satanic Church, basically, and the writer of the Satanic Bible, basically. And Anton LaVey, this gentleman reminds me of Anton LaVey, very much so. And he is a Satanist, actually, very good friend of mine. And the arguments that he makes in support of Lucifer are very compelling. They're very compelling, but I still disagree with that. The reason why is because I've come to believe what Yahweh's perspective is, from an ENTP perspective, from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective, that Yahweh's perspective upon the earth, upon humanity, is a lot different than, and it's more involved than we actually realize, from a Jungian perspective, okay? So what that basically is that it always leads to the question, if God is so perfect, if God is so loving, if God is so good, why did he create a world that sucks? Why do we have murder? Why do we have war? Why do we have all these difficult things that we have on the earth? The thing is that when Jesus was teaching about Yahweh, when Jesus was teaching about what he called the Father, aka Yahweh, basically, Jesus' argument was that he's a father and we're children here on the earth, right? And he basically, this experience of life as we know it is child rearing, okay? We are being child reared, okay? We are being taught things. And the thing is that the truth about Yahweh is that he loves humanity regardless. He loves humanity regardless. And that's where I bring in my previous point about my relationships with women, especially as of recently, my relationship with laser gun, my relationship with a railgun, my relationship with bayonet, and so many other women in my life that I've had relationships with. Oftentimes, I end up, these women get to this point, this place where they just don't feel loved. They feel so flawed. These women don't feel loved whatsoever. Well, I'll get back to that in a second. Oh yeah, mini campfire, nice. So, but here's the thing. I recently saw a movie, and it's to be fair, it is a Christian movie. It has a Christian bias to it. The movie is called The Shift. It's a great film. I highly recommend members of this audience go watch this film in theaters. No, I'm not trying to convert you to Christianity. That's not my business. And, a person's spirituality is ultimately their choice. It's why, I like living in the United States of America, because we have this thing in the Bill of Rights called freedom of religion. We have the freedom to practice whatever belief system you want, which is awesome. But in this movie, The Shift, it's literally basically a retelling of the story of the book of Job, essentially. And the book of Job answers a serious question, but then Jesus ends up clarifying the book of Job through his teachings about the Father, about Yahweh, essentially. So what I've ended up discovering is that The Shift as a movie is an excellent source to cite, basically, for, hey, this is why things are so shitty on the earth. This is why life is actually hard. It's really, really hard. Why? Why is everything so bad? Why is God so perfect? If God is so perfect, if he's so loving, that he sent his son to die for us and all these things, and he loves us so much, why is everything so bad? Why didn't he create a perfect world? So the reality of the situation is because of solipsism. Because humanity is solipsistic. Sin nature itself is solipsism. It is self above tribe. We are a feminine race, okay? We are a feminine race. Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to ask you for. 5% here. Just let's actually close that to save that battery for a little bit. And if you could hold it in your hands, because the cold will drain the battery faster. Thank you. So the point is that in this movie, the question is answered. Because no matter how bad things get on the earth, just like no matter how bad things got for Job, because what happened to Job was that, God was sitting on the throne, Yahweh's sitting on the throne, and he called all of the angels to him to, give an account. Hey, what are you doing? And all the angels came up to him, and they basically gave report, including Lucifer. Lucifer was standing there as well. And then And then God was like, hey, have you looked at my servant Job? Job is pretty happening dude. He's very righteous man. He's a fantastic fellow. He's awesome, you know. And Lucifer's like, yeah, that's cool that he's great, but he's only great because you gave him everything. It's only great because you gave him a perfect life, because you gave him a perfect earth, because you gave him everything he ever wanted. You gave him women, you gave him children, you gave him resources. He's a rich man. Of course he's going to be happy. Of course Job, of all people on the planet, he has it so good. Of course he's going to worship you because you're just there blessing him over and over and over and granting his heart's desires over and over. And you're just enabling him, Yahweh. How dare you enable Job, Yahweh? What are you doing? Right? Right? So Lucifer made a proposal saying, okay, how about you don't give that blessing to Job anymore and you hand him over to me and I'll get him to curse you. I'll get him to curse you. You'll see. You'll see. And then Yahweh's like, yeah, okay, go for it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Fine. So then Lucifer had to get permission from the Creator. He went down to the earth and he started fucking with Job over and over and over. His wife died. His children died. He lost absolutely everything. He had like boils and disease and sores all over his body. He was absolutely miserable. His friends were making fun of him. His friends were mocking him and constantly saying, curse God and die, curse God and die, over and over and over, right? Over and over and over, okay? You know, and oftentimes, a lot of humanity actually ends up identifying with Job because things in life are like, life is shit. Life sucks, you know. To quote an ENTP from the movie The Princess Bride, Wesley, when he says, life is pain. Anyone who says differently is selling something, right? Life is pain, okay? And he's an ENTP, okay? You know what's really great about that film? In that exact same, you know, in that exact same scene, you know, Buttercup, the princess, you know, who is betrothed to the prince to become the queen one day, is basically, you know, saying, well, I did this, doing this. She's trying to defend herself to him because he's like, hey, you know, why did you betray your man? You go out, you're going after the prince. Now you agreed to marry him. What are you doing? Like, you know, this ENTP is holding her accountable in this space, and she's trying to defend herself, and he just starts laughing at her. And he's like, ha, ha, ha. And what is that worth? The word of a woman. And I'm like, oh, okay, whoa. This ENTP is basically saying that that a woman's word is not worth much? Fantastic. It's because men's word is worth much. Women's word is not. You can only judge a woman by her actions, not her words. That's a fact. Because women make decisions based on intention, and they want to be held accountable for their intent, not their actions. But the problem is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as Lucifer is attempting to demonstrate with his torture of Job. And he did tortured him big time. But Job endured. Job did not curse God and die. He did not. And then because of that, the devil's time was taken away from him, and then the Creator restored everything to Job like 10x, gave him even more than he had previously as a reward. Okay? What lesson can we derive from that? What lesson can we derive from the Great One granting that to Job? Well, life sucks, folks. Life sucks entirely. Life sucks. And an ENTP would know how much life sucks, mostly more than most people, because SI inferior is in a state of constant uncomfort. And we end up hating reality. We hate the present because of extroverted sensing demon, you know, psychologically speaking. So we have a fundamental understanding of just how much life actually sucks. SI inferiors understand how life sucks basically more than anyone, especially a heart temple crusader, because heart temple is all about adversity. So an ENTP really understands adversity and the value of adversity. I often talk about how we as humans should not allow our pain to go to waste. We should not allow our suffering to go to waste, because Job did not let his suffering go to waste. And as much as Kevin Garner, the main character of the movie The Shift, did not let his suffering go to waste, as the villain of the story was literally torturing him the entire course of the movie. entirely. In fact, was actually torturing him before the movie even took place. There's an argument to be made that that the villain of the story actually killed his son, just killed his son, just straight up killed his son, and took his wife away, took his whole life away, and just literally just utterly obliterated his life. This poor man, Kevin Garner. But Kevin Garner was the only guy who refused the deal from the devil, basically. And you see other versions of himself in a parallel universe making the deal with the devil, but he didn't do it. And instead, he was cursed. He was cursed with suffering, and that curse was basically the devil was cursing him and torturing him for the entire, even since before the movie took place, and only at the end, after making the right choice, does the torture actually stop. The choice being that he would not relent, he would not curse God and die, basically. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Life is pain, life is suffering. But humanity suffers for a reason. Humanity suffers for a purpose. Because Yahweh loves humanity. Humanity is Yahweh's woman, basically. And Yahweh would like to be humanity's lover, essentially. Wants to unite with humanity and be with humanity and be with his hoe of a woman. Because we're hoes. Let me tell you, we commit idolatry all the time. Stripper poles, technically, are demon worship. Feminism is actually technically demon worship because it's actually worshiping Baal. Baal is a watcher, okay? Book of Enoch, like I said earlier, he is a watcher of heaven. Baal is a watcher, okay? Baal is a demon, okay? Stripper poles, previously known as Asherah poles, that is demon worship, okay? That's demon worship. Feminism is taught by the prophets of Baal. Feminism, and here's the reality. God hates feminism. That's a fact. God hates feminism. It's my favorite bumper sticker, actually. God hates feminism. Because the prophet Elijah was commanded by God to wipe out all of the feminists, basically, in Israel. And he did. He executed them. All of them. All the feminists. And feminism was taught by the chief prophetess of Baal, which was the queen to King Ahab, known as Jezebel. A lot of people, when they call a woman a Jezebel, they're calling her a whore. But the reality of the situation is that Jezebel actually means feminist. When you call a woman a Jezebel, you're actually calling her a feminist. That's actually what you're doing, okay? So feminism is demon worship, okay? The point is, though, is that in reality, when we look at how the earth is ultimately, this place, that we suffer on, we suffer for a reason. The reason why is because Yahweh is preparing humanity to be his woman. Essentially, we are a feminine race, okay? Whereas the angels are a masculine race. The angels were created to fulfill his extroverted sensing because he wanted a race to stick around and be idealistic towards him, right? But then at the same time, he has extrovert intuition, that function. He wants to be wanted, he wants to be chosen. So we created a solipsistic race that focuses on themselves instead of focusing on other people. Okay, and the solipsistic race, they would actually end up having more freedom of choice. This is why through our solipsism we have free will. We have free will, okay? Angels, they didn't exactly have free will because it was pre-programmed into their DNA or whatever it is that they have to be idealistic towards the Creator by default, okay? And then they ended up learning solipsism as a result of seeing us being solipsistic, and like, whoa, if humanity's solipsistic, why don't we experiment with solipsism? So the angels did experiment with solipsism, and that's why 1/3 of the angels fell with Lucifer because of solipsism. And that happened because of Lucifer's envy towards, according to John Milton, who, from his poem Paradise Lost, and John Milton claims it was divinely inspired because he was a blind man and never really even knew what anything looked like, but he could describe the Garden of Eden with such vivid imagery that people are like, wow, how is this even possible? But he's a blind man, So oftentimes people actually claim that Paradise Lost, as a story, a retelling of what happened in the Garden of Eden, is actually divinely inspired, just based on that, because the existence of Paradise Lost in of its own self is technically a miracle because John Milton was blind, okay? So the issue then is that things suck here because we're getting a spanking. Humanity is getting a spanking. We're being spanked. We're being disciplined. We are being child-reared, essentially. That's why everything sucks. That's why our life is so terrible, okay? That's why life on earth is horrible, because we're being child-reared. being a father is an aspect of king energy. Okay, this is where we talk about Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Okay, in the books King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, the king and king energy has father energy. It takes on the role of father, child rearing. Okay, punishing children, disciplining children, holding children accountable, and making sure that children, when they come of age, they are ready. Humanity, in its current state, we're not in our infancy, but we're probably on the precipice of coming of age right now, potentially, or according to some sources, we got another 1,000 years to go. Who knows? But compared to where we've been in the entire existence of our race, which is potentially a very, very, very long time, probably 200,000 years. Some people argue 6,000 years. Some people argue 8,000 years or 12,000 years. It doesn't matter. The point is that I personally believe, even though I don't really have much to back this up, that we're getting close to coming of age. So we're basically like teenagers right now, which you can think about it, like given how the cognitive functions move from hero to warrior, teenager to parent, child to, and so on and so forth. As the cognitive functions are advancing in our own lives, we as a race, collectively, under the collective unconscious, underneath God the Creator, are actually advancing and growing as well. Okay? So because of that, we are basically the earth is being utilized as this, it's our paddle, it's our rod, it's our, spare the rod, spoil the child, okay? Humanity would be spoiled, and that's Lucifer's argument against God about Job. Job only worships you because you spoil him, essentially. So the earth, basically, and this life that we live on the earth, and all the hardship we have, is basically the rod. We are being child reared by the Father. That's what Jesus' argument actually was, okay? That's what Isa's argument was. The argument is that we are being child reared, okay? That's why we are punished. That's why we suffer, okay? Because here's the reality of the situation. Having relationships with women, as an ENTP, having relationships with railgun, having relationships with bayonet, a relationship with laser gun, and all the other women in my life, in the past, machete, even my first love, for example, like these women in my life, I've come to realize something because they're so scared. Women are scared. They're scared shitless. They're always scared. They're always so insecure all the time. And it's because they lack power, right? Well, guess what? Humanity, in its own right, lacks power because humanity doesn't even have immortality, for example. Humanity is weak. Humanity expires. Humanity lacks power. You see what I'm saying? And we're seeking power. That's why we're power seeking. We're power seeking through our solipsism. And solipsism is heavily concentrated in women, especially, okay? Whereas masculine idealism is present within men. But women are ending up, in this situation where they need power because oftentimes they feel powerless. And this is why they feel insecure all the time. And that's why they're always scared all the time. And they don't stop being scared unless they have masculine leadership that is guided by idealism in their life. Where do women get masculine leadership from? They're supposed to get it from men. And they're supposed to get it, especially from their fathers and ultimately their husbands. And, and potentially after their husbands are dead, their sons. Masculine leadership, okay? Because if a woman does not have masculine leadership in her life, psychologically what happens, she's living an aimless life. She is entirely aimless. Entirely. Okay? She's living an aimless life. So this ends up becoming a big problem for women in general. So they're very insecure. And especially me being in relationships with extroverted sensing pessimistic women, right? Extroverted sensing inferiors, extroverted sensing parents, right? These are the women who especially have a very unique need that I have discovered. And then I realized that this unique need is actually present in all women. All women have this. But extroverted sensing pessimistic women, ISTPs, ISFPs, INTJs, and INFJs are especially sensitive to this need. And that is hearing a particular phrase from a man, and then he proves that phrase, these words, with action, okay? And that is the following phrase. I love you regardless. I love you regardless of your flaws. I love you regardless of the gash on your face. I love you regardless of your infertility. I love you regardless of your back acne. I love you regardless of how shit your hair looks today. I love you regardless of XYZ flaw. because it's the SE pessimistic women out there who are actually trying to ultimately be top performers, if not perfect performers, for their men. And they know that they're going to fail because extroverted sensing, ultimately, while it goes out its way to make other people feel safe, other people feel comfortable, to be as memorable as possible, and to give the men in their lives a really great, memorable experience, because at deep down, they're afraid of being abandoned. They're afraid of those men walking out on them. They're afraid of those men not being that rock that they need, that they can stand on. That they're afraid of those men not being reliable. That those men won't be there to catch them when they fall. They're very afraid of this. And they all have this abandonment complex about them. So they're constantly walking around questioning whether or not they're even good enough, whether or not their performance is good enough. And then as a result, they become very hyper aware of their flaws. Very hyper aware of their flaws. Such that they have this insane need, psychologically, for their man to tell them, I love you regardless. I love you regardless. I love you regardless. And that ends up becoming an issue. No, men did not teach them that fear. They have that fear regardless of how men have behaved in their life. However, if men do behave poorly in their life, they become even extra sensitive and have an insane amount of baggage that they carry with them. This is why it's more important for virgins to get with men, because they have the least amount of baggage. It doesn't mean they don't have baggage. Even a virgin woman could be mistreated by her father or other men in her life, right? And she still has baggage, right? But the thing is that when women have sex with men, they become psychologically intertwined and attached to those men, and they have a really hard time letting go. Why? It's especially prevalent among extroverted sensing pessimistic women. Why? Because they have introverted intuition optimistic. And introverted intuition optimistic is very weak to attachment. Extremely weak to attachment. To the point where they get attached to a man, they have an extremely hard time letting go. To the point where they, in order to even give them what they need to let go, something horrible has to happen between them and that man. It could be a death, like a death in the family, or a bad decision that led to by the man that led to a death of a family member that they loved, or maybe even getting themselves close to death or whatever, to the point where they actually have to hit rock bottom in most cases in order for those NI optimistic women to even be able to let go of that man to begin with. So the point is, extroverted sensing pessimistic women end up having insane amounts of baggage. Insane amounts of baggage. And when they take on a new man, that new man has to deal with, and his idealism better be top notch, because he has to deal with their baggage, their stored up baggage that men have piled on in their lives, or that they themselves have piled on in their lives due to their lack of self-esteem anyway. Because extroverted sensing pessimistic women really struggle with self-esteem. And in most cases, you could argue that they struggle with self-esteem issues the most. You could argue, though, that extrovert intuition pessimistic women also have a similar issue with self-esteem. You could argue that. But I've mostly seen that in ISJ women. I have not really seen that much in INTP women or INFP women. Not as much. It is there. I'm just talking about levels of esteem issues. But as far as self-esteem issues, as far as I've observed within my own life, it's extrovert sensing pessimistic women. They have self-esteem issues the most. And people in their lives prey upon that. Other women prey upon that. Men prey upon that. Even they themselves prey upon that, because they end up gaslighting themselves through those various horrible situations, and it ends up getting worse over time for those women. Okay? It's horrible. And they don't even realize that they are doing it to themselves, or even allowing themselves to do it to themselves, because of their anti-optimistic attachments that they themselves have mismanaged, because of the lack of true masculine leadership in their life. Okay? It is only masculine leadership that will deliver these women from themselves, deliver these women from the women that will prey upon these things in their life, deliver these women from the men that will prey on them, basically. And yet, that man who takes on these women as a responsibility, he still has to deal with all their baggage. Their baggage ends up becoming like these sunburns on their souls, where if a man starts acting like a way, they're going to react with all that stored up pain in their past from all the suffering that they have brought upon themselves, suffering fellow women have brought upon them, and suffering from fellow men especially have brought upon them. And they will react with the full force of all that stored up pain, all that stored up baggage, and bring it right into the relationship. And they can't help it. They can't help it. They literally can't help it. This is why it's wiser for a man to take on a virgin, because she has the least amount of baggage psychologically. Because women get psychologically, especially anti-optimistic women, they get psychologically attached to men, and they just can't let go unless a tragedy happens, a tragedy like death, okay? And only then are they willing to use their anti-optimism to take them in a completely new direction and detach, from that perspective. That's really the only thing, the only way to get them out of that, with this psychological issue, okay? So this means that they become hyper aware of their flaws. They become hyper aware of their capacity to fail and how they may even come off as failures to other people. They become hyper aware of this, okay? And that hyper awareness causes them to question their self-esteem consistently, where they are questioning whether or not they are worthy enough, whether or not they're good enough, whether or not they're smart enough, whether or not they can perform well enough. You just go down all 8 cognitive functions, and they're questioning every single function within their own selves, to the point where it leads to potentially insane depression, okay? Insane depression. This is why a lot of people with mental issues, out of the 16 types, I would make the argument that extroverted sensing pessimistic women end up having the most mental issues in terms of dealing with depression more than any of the other women out there among the 16 types, literally because of these abandonment issues that comes as a result of poor self-esteem and how they are trying to handle or ultimately mishandle the extroverted sensing pessimism, which doesn't really become that much of a problem if they had proper masculine leadership in their lives. Like if their men were there actually protecting them, if their fathers were there vetting, their man that would be taking their virginity, etc. Because if you take a woman's virginity, you have a blood pact with God the Creator, and she's basically your wife. It doesn't matter if you have a marriage ceremony. It doesn't matter if you say I do. It doesn't matter if you present a ring. If you have sex with a virgin, she is your wife. Period. End of story. And if a man has sex with a non-virgin, he's basically saying to that woman, I forgive you of your sexual past. I forgive you for all your stored up baggage. And it's almost, this is why it's said in the New Testament, basically, when the bridegroom presents his bride to himself, he does it without stain or blemish. He is forgiving her of her sexual past, okay? That's the point. He's forgiving her of her baggage, even though he knows he's going to have to deal with her baggage because of these sunburns. Like the genie in Aladdin, don't touch the sunburn. Where the man, her new man, starts, her groom, her husband starts acting in a way that looks like or is similar to previous men or previous women in the past, and then she reacts negatively to him with indignance. And women are very good at being indignant. All women have this problem, but especially extroverted sensing pessimistic, okay? Indignance becomes a huge problem, where they are reacting negatively to perceived maltreatment. And it's easy for these women with baggage to perceive maltreatment, and then they react negatively. This is why, men call them, oh, that she's just a bitch, okay? They react negatively. And the women can have so much baggage, where the baggage is so bad, they end up developing narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder for extroverted feeling women, and narcissistic personality disorder for introverted feeling women. How many INTJ women out there have narcissistic personality disorder? Look at Amber Heard. She's an INTJ. She has narcissistic personality disorder. Think about it, okay? My INTJ X, who is a huge amount of drama here on the channel. You all know who I'm talking about. She has narcissistic personality disorder, okay? Hopefully she grew out of it by now. But the point is, she's basically a clone of Amber Heard, let's be honest, okay? Narcissistic personality disorder, that's what happens to these girls. That's what happens, okay? In this bullshit society. That's what happens. Or in any society on this planet. Because of lack of male leadership. Proper male leadership, okay? So that ends up happening. It ends up becoming a big problem. So, as a result, they have this fundamental need of having a man in their life who's exhibiting masculine leadership for these girls and saying, I love you regardless. I love you regardless. That's what they need. And it's not enough for a man to just say it. It is important for the man to prove that with his actions, to prove to them that he still loves her with her flaws. Earlier today, Lasergun actually posted a nice infographic comic inside the general chat of the Cartel Discord, which is our women's group, basically. And I'm actually going to take you folks through it right here. So I'm going to read it to you. I mean, here's kind of what it looks like. But so this is a man talking to his wife, and she's like crying, and he says, quote, "Did you know you don't have to be perfect for me to love you?" Right? And then he says, "Did you know you don't need to force yourself to be happy all the time when you're around me?" And then he says, "Did you know I want to support you through your problems?" It shows a picture of him being her hero. So they're trying to like scale a mountain. And he's like, "Did you know that I chose to be with you?" And then he says at the end, "I chose you, every single part of you. Every single part of you." And that, folks, is what these SE pessimistic women need. That, folks, is what humanity needs. Humanity is a woman, okay? Humanity is feminine. We are solipsistic as a race. This is why we think of ourselves. Angels, they think of others before they think of themselves, except for those that failed to solipsism in their experiment with solipsism, okay? This is why women have to express gratitude to their men, okay? So this leads me to the meaning of life. The meaning of life between idealism and solipsism, the meaning of life. And the meaning of life is this. Can humanity, despite all the suffering that we are in and all of our flaws, can humanity literally actually accept the idealism, the love from the Creator? Can humanity actually do that? Can it? Because here's the thing. When a man, or God the Creator, tells humanity or tells his woman, right? Because our relationships with women is the same thing as, and is literally an analog. It's literally an analog of God the Creator's relationship with humanity is our relationship with women, okay? It's literally the same, okay? And if God the Creator could send his one and only begotten Son, for example, or loves humanity so much, right? Where he's literally saying, "I love you regardless." That is ultimately the story of the New Testament, basically, the Injil, okay? I love you regardless, okay? That's basically what that message is. I love you regardless. And he proves that by sacrificing his life, for example, okay? He proves that. I love you regardless, okay? Laying down his life, which is the true action of male idealism, because it is written, there's no greater love than when a man gives up his life for his beloved. There's no greater love than that. Proof of masculine idealism, the ultimate proof of masculine idealism, that self-sacrifice of masculine idealism, which is entirely ignored by the red pill for some reason. But, from that perspective, that male idealism, I love you regardless, and proving it with action, I love you regardless, from God the Creator to humanity. So also these women need to hear, I love you regardless. I love you regardless of your flaws. I oftentimes use Twilight, the vampire movies. I have women watch New Moon, the second film in the Twilight series, and I ask them, who is the most beautiful woman in that film? They never get it right. The most beautiful woman is the wife of the alpha wolf pack leader. She has a huge scar on his face, or on her face, basically. Yet her husband loves her regardless, okay? I love you regardless. That is the entire point, okay? That's the reality, okay? I love you regardless. They all need to hear this, okay? So, but here's the difference, though. Expressions of gratitude from a woman. See, a woman has to prove her femininity because her femininity makes her beautiful to a man. What makes men beautiful to women is their capacity with their idealism to say, I love you regardless. But what does a woman do to prove her femininity? She does it through gratitude and appreciation for her man. How does she do this? Regardless of her hardship. So then the woman looks upon God the Creator, or a woman looks upon her husband, or a woman looks upon her father and says, I love you regardless of all of your discipline and child rearing and all the pain that I feel when you are teaching me to be a better version of myself. I love you regardless. And that's what Job's response was in the book of Job, where he's like, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. I love the Lord regardless. So also did Kevin Gardner in front of the devil in that movie, The Shift, made that same argument. I love the Creator regardless. Regardless of everything I have suffered. I have faith. I love him regardless. Regardless of all this pain and suffering, regardless of him teaching me and the pain that comes with teaching, because when you get taught something, it hurts. You know, when you're learning a new skill, sometimes you get hit with the bamboo from the teacher teaching you gung fu, okay? Sometimes you get smacked around a little bit because you have to learn, because spare the rod, spoil the child. I love you regardless of the rod you use on me. This is actually the meaning of life, folks. This is literally the meaning as to why humanity exists. This is why we suffer. This is the point of our existence, where we can look at the Creator that I've already proven it exists, because I proved intelligent design in season 17 playlist on this YouTube channel, where we can look at the Creator and be like, I love you regardless of all of the pain that I feel as a result of you teaching me to be a better me, as you are preparing me to be your lover, as you are preparing our race to be your lover. And as much as a father does that for a daughter, and as much as a husband takes on that fatherly role for his wife too, because sometimes she needs to be put in her place, okay, where she could still look up at him and still be grateful, no matter how painful and how hurtful things can actually get. And that is the lesson. That is the lesson that I had to learn as an ENTP as a result of my relationships with women in my life, okay? And that has become a core component of my spiritual journey and my understanding of God the Creator and why things absolutely totally suck here on the earth. I recommend you people you do not allow your suffering to go to waste. That you actually turn your suffering into something good, and that you all be grateful for your suffering, because that suffering is there with a promise. Tomorrow will be a better day, or the next life will be a better one, okay? You suffer, okay? Yes, you do, but you need to be grateful for your suffering. You need to be grateful for your flaws. You need to be grateful for your weakness, because it is our suffering, our flaws, and our weakness that make us beautiful to begin with. Humanity is beautiful, and we're here on this beautiful planet, the Earth. If we do not bring back masculinity, we will lose the Earth, as prophesied. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. In the last days, I will send my prophet Elijah to you, just before the end of the world, and he will turn the hearts of fathers to the sons, and the hearts of sons to the fathers. Bring back masculinity, or else I will strike the earth with a decree of utter destruction. We will lose the earth. I don't know about you guys, but I like the earth. I like the sun. I don't want to be put on a lifeless world where there is no sun, where it's absolute total darkness. I like the earth. I would like to stay here, okay? We have to bring back masculinity. That's the entire point about what we're trying to do here as ego hackers within this community, okay? It's just how it works, all right? That's the reality of the situation, okay? So here's the thing. Anytime you're out there whining and complaining about how bad things really actually are, you better be grateful. Because guess what? Job had it way worse. Kevin Garner had it way worse than you ever did, okay? Had it way worse. And yet he was strong enough to endure and not curse God and die, and instead be grateful for his suffering, okay? Because it's one thing for God the Creator look down on humanity, or for a man to look at his woman and say, I love you regardless. But it's entirely a different thing entirely for a woman to look back at her man, for humanity to look back at God the Creator and say, I love you regardless of the punishment and the child rearing and the rod that you used to spank my ass over and over and over. We are an undisciplined race. We don't even care about our fathers anymore. We are a fatherless, multi-generation of fatherlessness over and over and over. And what do we have for it? We've only actually increased the suffering in the world. Just look at the statistics. People's happiness is the worst it's ever been in the world. Yet our technology gets better and better and better. Why is that? Because there are no fathers, okay? So show respect. Show respect for your suffering. And understand that your suffering comes with a promise, because that your suffering is improving you. Your suffering is getting you closer to enlightenment. Your suffering is allowing you to reach cognitive integration from a Jungian analytical psychology perspective. You are becoming a complete human being. Complete also means holy. The path to holiness is suffering. The path to wisdom is suffering. If I get on my knees and I'm praying to God, asking him for wisdom, do you know what he's going to give me? Suffering. If I ask him for humility, do you know what he's going to do to me? He's going to humiliate me. If I ask him for discipline, what is he going to do? He's going to beat my ass. That's the reality. And I have to be grateful for that. Okay? That is the meaning of life, folks, right there. That's literally why we as humanity exist. All proven through Jungian analytical psychology. Pay attention, folks. That's the reality. So, and this is how I live my life as an ENTP. And the women in my life, when I say I love you regardless, I fucking mean it. And I prove it with action every day of my life. It's who I am. Because I'm willing to endure, and I'm willing to endure their baggage in as much as Job was willing to endure his suffering. This is why all I can do is just show them compassion for their suffering, regardless of what they've done. And truth be told, that even includes Railgun. So, anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening to this Confessions of an ENTP. Have a good night, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.